Good day, my name is Olonjan F. Corbetta, and I'm about to report the human movement system in PE. Hope you like it and enjoy, and thank you for watching.
So this is looking at the human movement system, and it's beyond an introduction to movement. It's looking more at the components that make up movement. And in order to have that conversation, we need to look more globally at this concept of the human movement system. And what you see on the screen here is you see that movement is down here at the bottom, and a movement is a product of the articular system. Now, the articular system is a fancy way of saying the skeletal system, joints, connective tissue, ligaments, is basically the passive tissues that are non-excitable. That system is 100% dependent upon muscular input, and the muscular input is 100% dependent upon the nervous system. And the nervous system, if you see the blue spark up there, is driven by conscious and subconscious thought. So when we look at movement, we look at this hierarchy of control from the nervous system controls the muscular system controls the articular system, and all movement is occurring from our joint output. So we spend a lot of time looking at these joint movements in terms of what's happening at the spine, the shoulder girdle, pelvic girdle, and the extremities, and trying to determine which plane of motion these are moving in. Is this flexion or extension? Trying to describe these positions. And we're doing that so we can get this understanding of how are we going to manipulate these systems? How are we going to manipulate the nervous system? How are we going to provide intervention in the muscular system so that we can change any one of these tiers, all by either assessing the quality of the movement and trying to enhance the performance of the movement. So we'll go back to this slide here. When we look at the body can do infinite amount of positions and movements, right? It's inexhaustible in terms of what we can and can't do. But when we look at the body, we want to really see that it's these 7 areas, right? In terms of the 3 regions of the spine, the shoulder girdle, pelvic girdle, and then the arms and legs where all this movement is occurring. And there's just these joints here that you see, and as long as you're responsible for those joints and you understand the muscular inputs for those, that's the starting point, and then we get into the whole relationship of how they're all interrelated. Movement occurs at the joints, and the joints are made up from the interactions of the bones. When we have the bones here, these are the major primary players when we look at the skeletal system. And then we have the divisions of the skeleton. You can see here highlighted in like a creepy green, and then your typical bone character there, bone color. So we have the axial skeleton, which is the center aspect. That's where axis, axial. And really, these are bones that come in singles and not pairs, like the appendicular skeleton when we see the arms and the legs. The ribs throw this off. We look at the thoracic spine. There's a part of the spine that contains the ribs. And we just look at the ribs as an extension or continuation of those thoracic vertebrae. But we have this axial region, appendicular region, but we'll really want to look at the body. We want to look at the body in terms of these segments. We want to look at this arms and legs, which really are just the extension of force generation, which is coming from the spine. The spine really is the engine that drives human movement. And we look at the shoulder girdle and the pelvic girdle. These are the transition or the relay stations that transfer force from the spine being generated to these upper and lower extremities. When we get further into our future assessments, we'll be really taking in consideration how the pelvic girdle and the shoulder girdles are interacting with one another. So we get into this concept of joint movement, and joint movement is based on the plane of movement, which we've already discussed. We have these 3-dimensional coordinate systems, sagittal, frontal, and transverse planes. And from those planes, we have all of these available movements. So the question we ask is, what causes that joint motion? We have spent a lot of time identifying the joints, but let's examine the actual movements themselves. So recall that joints are the pivot points for the bones to interact, and that human movement is rotation. So we look at this image on the left here with the wheel spinning. That is the type of movement, that rotation movement that is occurring in the human body for when you're throwing something, exercising, pushing something, jumping, whatever it is that you're thinking about doing. This is a biological structure, and so a true axis, like on the right here, this hinge doesn't exist within the bone. It's a instantaneous axis, but it's rotation nonetheless. And when we look at the linear outputs that we create, these are all due to rotational inputs that are occurring within the musculoskeletal neuromuscular systems. What causes the joint motion? And the simple answer to that is force, but that force has to be coming from some source. And when we look at the review of what a force is, so if you remember, a force is nothing more than a push or a pull. So it's some stimulus that is exerted by one object on another. When we're dealing with the human body, when we're dealing with any of this functional anatomy aspect, we're dealing with the balance between external forces and internal forces. And external forces, most of the time, it is gravity. Now, sometimes the resistance can be coming from elastics, friction, or other like wind resistance, water resistance, but 99% of the time, the resistance that we're overcoming is gravity. When you're looking at someone trying to stand, someone trying to throw something, or move some weight around. The internal forces, these are going to always be coming from muscular contractions, and muscle contractions always result in muscle tension. So tension is the internal force, gravity is the
That's my report. Thank you for listening and watching, and that's all. Thank you.